The assassin had a knife at Crown Prince Adrian Vale's throat when he looked past him, saw the frail groom Adrian had spent a week trying not to pity, and dropped to one knee. Steel struck marble as the blade slipped from the man's hand. Around them, 6 royal guards froze in the same stunned half-circle, swords drawn but suddenly useless. Elias Fenwick stood near the chapel doors, one pale hand braced against the stone column, as if the short walk from the wedding chamber had already cost him too much. His breathing was shallow. His face had gone almost colorless. Yet he was the only person in the corridor who did not look surprised. "Your Highness, behind me." Adrian stepped between Elias and the intruder by instinct. The movement was so familiar now that he barely thought about it. Since their marriage 3 weeks earlier, he had learned to notice the smallest signs of Elias tiring. The tightening around his mouth, the way his fingers searched for furniture before his pride admitted he needed support. Adrian had ordered chairs moved into rooms that had never needed them, shortened ceremonies, doubled the guards outside Elias's quarters. Elias had thanked him exactly once. After that, he had simply endured it. Now his gaze slid from Adrian's protective stance to the kneeling assassin. "Move," Elias said quietly. Adrian glanced back. "Absolutely not. I wasn't speaking to you." The assassin obeyed. He shifted his knee 2 inches away from the fallen knife and placed both empty hands where the guards could see them. Adrian felt something cold settle beneath his ribs. The man had ignored a crown prince's command to surrender less than 30 seconds ago. Elias had spoken 6 words, and he moved like a chastened soldier. Captain Rowan recovered first. He kicked the knife away and seized the assassin by the shoulder. Face down, the man resisted just enough to make 3 guards tighten their grips. Then Elias's fingers flexed against the column. "Don't." Every muscle in the assassin's body went still. Adrian turned fully toward his husband. Until that moment, pity had seemed like an ugly but harmless private failure. Elias was 24, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, and still recovering from an illness no physician at court could explain beyond the damage it had left behind. He could climb 1 flight of stairs on a good day. On a bad one, he hid the tremor in his hands inside his sleeves. Adrian had told himself his protectiveness was kindness. The look Elias gave him now made kindness feel uncomfortably close to ignorance. "You know him," Adrian said. Elias's expression barely changed, but his hand left the column. "I know what he is." The assassin raised his head. He was perhaps 40, scarred across one cheek, dressed in servant gray beneath a leather harness designed to hide blades. His eyes never touched Adrian. They remained fixed on Elias with something Adrian had not expected from a killer. Not fear. Recognition. "My lord," the assassin said. Elias went rigid. The reaction was tiny, but Adrian caught it. So did Captain Rowan. "He is not your lord," Rowan snapped. "He is the crown prince's consort." A strange grief passed across the assassin's face. "That is not what I meant." The corridor seemed to contract around them. Adrian heard distant bells from the lower courtyard, bright and ordinary against the aftermath of attempted murder. He looked at the broken wax seal near the service door, the bloodless blade on the floor, the guard who had been struck unconscious before the attacker reached him. This had not been theater. Someone had penetrated the inner palace, bypassed royal security, and come within inches of killing the heir to the throne. Yet the most dangerous man in the corridor was kneeling because he had seen Elias. "Take him alive," Adrian ordered. "No one questions him without me present." "Without us," Elias said. Adrian stared at him. Elias met his gaze evenly, though his breathing had grown rougher. "If you interrogate him alone, you may not understand what you're hearing." There it was again, not bravado, not mystery for its own sake, but certainty. Adrian had spent weeks watching servants steady Elias on wet steps and physicians warn him against standing too long. He had never once heard that tone from him. Captain Rowan clearly had. His grip shifted on the prisoner. "Your Highness, with respect, Lord Elias is now part of a security investigation." Adrian's temper sharpened. "He is my husband." Elias's mouth tightened. Adrian realized, a second too late, that he had answered the wrong concern. The assassin looked between them, and for the first time, something almost like pity entered his face. Not for Elias. For Adrian. "You truly don't know?" he murmured. Rowan hauled him upright. "Enough." The assassin allowed himself to be dragged toward the stairwell, but before the guards turned him away, he looked back at Elias. "They found the old route," he said. Elias lost what little color remained in his face. Adrian caught his arm before his knees could give way. Elias flinched, not from pain, but from the grip itself, and Adrian immediately loosened his hand. For one brief second, Elias looked at him with the trapped, distant expression of someone remembering restraints rather than receiving help. Then it vanished. What old route? Adrian asked. Elias watched the assassin disappear behind the iron doors. When he answered, his voice was controlled again. The one that was supposed to have died with everyone who built it. The first thing Captain Rowan found was proof that the assassin had never come for Elias. By dawn, the chapel corridor had been sealed, the unconscious guard had awakened with a fractured wrist, and 3 members of the Palace Security Council were crowded around a map in Adrian's private study. A thin red line marked the intruder's path from the eastern service wall to the exact place where Adrian had been expected to cross after morning prayers. Elias stood at the far end of the table, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair he had refused to sit in. Rowan tapped the final mark. He adjusted twice when your schedule changed. Once at the lower gallery, once outside the chapel. He was tracking you, Your Highness. Adrian looked toward Elias. And when he saw my husband? Rowan's jaw tightened. He abandoned the attack. The words landed harder than Adrian expected. Until then, some part of him had entertained the possibility that Elias had been the true target, that the kneeling had been some private warning wrapped in ritual. The evidence destroyed that theory. The assassin had entered the palace to kill Adrian. Seeing Elias had changed his mind. There's more, Rowan said. He placed a narrow strip of dark leather on the map. A faded symbol had been pressed into it, nearly worn away. 3 vertical cuts crossed by a single horizontal line. Elias's fingers tightened around the chair. Adrian noticed. Rowan did too. We found this sewn under his collar. You know it, Adrian said. Elias did not answer immediately. His attention had shifted to the room itself. The window, the side door, the 2 guards outside the study, then the fireplace passage that had been sealed generations ago. Adrian had begun noticing that habit only since yesterday. Elias never entered a room without measuring how people could leave it. He had mistaken it for nervousness. Now he wasn't sure what it was. I know the mark, Elias said at last. Rowan leaned forward. From where? That depends on whether you want an answer or a confession. The captain's expression hardened. Adrian almost smiled despite himself. Almost. Elias. I'm serious. Elias finally sat, more because his legs seemed to demand it than because anyone had persuaded him. If every piece of information I give you becomes evidence against me, I need to know which conversation we're having. Adrian heard the strain beneath the calm. Yesterday, when he had caught Elias before he fell, that brief flash of panic had not been about weakness. It had been about being held. This is not an interrogation, Adrian said. Rowan looked at him. Adrian added, not yet. Elias's gaze sharpened. Comforting. The dry reply was so perfectly timed that Rowan looked offended on Adrian's behalf. Adrian only exhaled through his nose. Tell us what you can. Elias looked at the leather strip again. It belonged to a royal intelligence unit that officially never existed. Rowan's face changed. The Black Chamber? That was the name courtiers gave it after it was dissolved. The people inside never called it that. Adrian felt the room tighten. He had heard the phrase once, years ago, during an argument between his father and a minister who later resigned. A disgraced intelligence office. Illegal arrests. Quiet disappearances. The Crown had buried the scandal before Adrian was old enough to inherit any of its files. You said the route should have died with the people who built it, Adrian said. This symbol belonged to them. Elias nodded. To some of them. And the man downstairs? Elias looked away. I knew him before he became the man you saw yesterday. Rowan folded his arms. That sounds remarkably close to a confession. Adrian's irritation flared, but Elias answered before he could. If I had sent him to kill the Crown Prince, Captain, kneeling in the middle of the corridor would be an unusual way to maintain operational secrecy. Rowan went still. Adrian did smile this time, briefly. It vanished when the study door opened. A young guard entered carrying a ledger sealed inside a linen evidence wrap. Your Highness, we checked the Eastern Watch records. He placed the ledger before Rowan. The intruder didn't bypass the outer patrol. Rowan frowned. Then how did he cross it? He was never challenged. The guard pointed to 3 names on the roster. Their rotation was changed 2 nights ago by written order. Adrian looked down at the authorization mark. It was genuine. His father's security seal. Someone with access inside the royal household had moved the guards, opened a path, and placed Adrian exactly where an assassin expected him to be. Elias rose too quickly and caught himself against the table. Adrian moved instinctively, then stopped before touching him. Elias noticed the hesitation. Something unreadable passed between them. You can sit, Adrian said, softer now. That was almost a request, Elias murmured. I'm improving. This time the corner of Elias's mouth moved, but the warmth lasted less than a second. His eyes returned to the altered roster. The old route wasn't discovered, he said. It was reopened. Rowan turned toward him. Elias pointed to the changed guard rotation, then to the hidden passage marked on the palace map. Whoever sent that man didn't find a forgotten weakness in your security. They had enough authority to manufacture one. Adrian looked again at the assassin's insignia, the royal seal, and the path that had been cleared through his own home. For the first time, the danger no longer felt like something that had entered the palace from outside. Someone inside the crown had known exactly how to let it in. By noon, someone had already tried to erase the guard order that reopened the eastern route. Captain Rowan found the original authorization page half-burned in a records brazier behind the security office, its lower edge blackened, but the royal seal still visible. More troubling was the second mark hidden beneath it, for tiny ink dots pressed into the paper in a pattern Rowan dismissed as damage. Elias did not. He leaned over the document without touching it. Don't scrape those. Rowan paused with a knife already under the wax. Why? Because they're not stains. Elias glanced at Adrian. They tell you who handled the order after it was sealed. Rowan's skepticism returned immediately. And you know that because? Elias ignored the tone and pointed to the dots. The first 3 indicate transfer. The 4th means the messenger never saw the authorizing officer. He collected the order from a dead drop. Adrian studied the page. So whoever opened the route never had to show their face. Correct. Elias shifted his weight, then reached for the table before Adrian could move. Adrian noticed the effort it cost him and kept his hands at his sides. That restraint seemed to register. Elias gave him the briefest look before turning back to the evidence. More importantly, this code was abandoned years before the Black Chamber was officially dissolved. Rowan's expression changed. Then someone is copying old methods. No, Elias's answer came too quickly. The room quieted. He drew a slow breath. Someone is using them correctly. That distinction altered everything. A copycat could have found a forgotten symbol or stolen an old manual. Correct use meant training, records, or living knowledge. Adrian felt the danger move closer. No longer an old scandal reaching forward through rumor, but an active hand inside the palace using a language Elias recognized on sight. Can you trace it? He said. Rowan turned sharply. Your Highness, he saw what we didn't. Adrian kept his eyes on Elias. Can you? Elias studied him for a moment, as though the question mattered for reasons beyond the investigation. Possibly. Then we proceed with him. Rowan's jaw tightened. As consultant or suspect? Adrian heard Elias exhale softly beside him. Captain, Adrian said, if he were only a suspect, you would still be staring at 4 ink dots. That earned him a sideways glance from Elias, almost amused. Almost. The search moved from the security office to an unused archive beneath the West Tower, where old intelligence records had been boxed behind tax ledgers and military inventories. Dust lay thick on the shelves, but one cabinet had been opened recently. Elias saw it before Rowan did. That hinge. Adrian followed his gaze. The brass was clean where the surrounding metal had dulled. Rowan pulled the cabinet open. Inside, half the files were missing. The remaining folders had been reordered to look untouched. Elias reached for one, stopped, and instead nodded toward Adrian. Gloves. Adrian handed him a pair from the evidence kit. Elias took them without comment. It was such a small thing, but Adrian felt the difference immediately. Yesterday, he would have taken the folder himself and told Elias to sit down. Now Elias had asked for what he needed, and Adrian had simply given it. The file contained lists of coded transfers, payments to nameless contractors, and transport orders between royal estates. Rowan skimmed the first page. Nothing here points to yesterday's attacker. You're reading the destinations, Elias said. Read the delays. Rowan frowned. Elias tapped 3 entries separated by years. Each order had been paused for exactly 9 days before release. 9 days meant containment failure. Someone inside the unit had disappeared, defected, or refused assignment. The delay gave handlers time to threaten whatever leverage they held. Adrian looked at him. Families. Elias's face hardened. Sometimes. He turned a page. Sometimes debt. Sometimes imprisonment. Whatever worked. The answer carried no theatrical bitterness, but something in his voice made Adrian stop seeing the archive as paper. Elias knew this because someone had taught him, or because he had survived it. Before Adrian could press, Elias found another entry and went still. A transfer order dated 11 years earlier bore the same four-dot mark as the burned security page. Beside it was a handwritten notation, Route Eastern, authorized access, Level 4. Rowan leaned closer. Level 4 was command clearance. Elias said nothing. Adrian watched the color drain from his face. Whose authorization? Rowan asked. Elias closed the file. That page shouldn't be here. Whose? Rowan repeated. Elias's eyes met Adrian's, and for once there was no dry answer waiting behind them. Only calculation, and something close to fear. Adrian reached for the file, but Elias kept one hand over it. If I show you this, he said quietly, you will stop seeing me as someone who happened to survive that system. Adrian did not pull the folder away. I think we passed that point yesterday. For a second, neither moved. Then Elias lifted his hand. Beneath it, next to the Level 4 clearance, was a name Adrian recognized immediately. Elias Fenwick. By the time Adrian and Elias came up from the archive, the evidence had already escaped them. 2 royal guards were waiting outside Adrian's apartments, not facing outward toward the corridor, but inward toward the doors. Captain Rowan saw them and swore under his breath. Whose order? The senior guard straightened. The Security Council, sir. Lord Elias is not to leave the royal wing without escort until his connection to the former intelligence service is reviewed. Elias stopped beside Adrian. He did not argue. That frightened Adrian more than anger would have. The council has not seen the file, Adrian said. It was found less than 20 minutes ago. Neither guard answered. Rowan's face hardened. Someone had learned about the Level 4 clearance before the 3 of them had even left the West Tower. Adrian stepped between Elias and the guards. Remove yourselves. Your Highness, the order bears the Lord Chancellor's seal. Then the Lord Chancellor can explain to me why he is restricting my husband on evidence he should not yet possess. The guards exchanged a glance, but moved aside. Elias entered without looking at them. Adrian followed and closed the door himself. For several seconds, Elias stood perfectly still near the table, scanning the windows, the servant entrance, the fireplace passage. The old habit again. Only now Adrian understood that he was not checking for escape because he was nervous. He was checking because somewhere in his past, failing to notice an exit had mattered. You knew this could happen, Adrian said. Elias removed his gloves one finger at a time. I knew what happens when institutions discover a person they cannot classify. That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give without putting other people in danger. Adrian's frustration rose, but so did something else. The memory of Elias flinching when he had been caught in the corridor. Not from weakness, from restraint. Adrian forced his voice lower. The document carries your name beside Level 4 authorization. In the records we found, that meant command access. Elias looked at him. It meant access. Rowan said command. Rowan is reading a system from the outside. The distinction was precise enough to matter and evasive enough to infuriate him. Before Adrian could respond, the doors opened again. This time Lord Chancellor Bellamy entered with 2 council ministers and a clerk carrying a sealed portfolio. Bellamy was an elegant man in his late 50s, silver-haired, controlled, and almost never visibly hurried. Today he had moved quickly enough to forget ceremony. Your Highness, Lord Elias. His gaze lingered on Elias half a second too long. This matter can no longer remain private. Adrian did not invite him to sit. Interesting, considering it was private until someone informed you. Bellamy ignored the accusation and opened the portfolio. Inside was a copy of the archive page. Not a summary. A copy. Rowan stepped closer. Where did you get that? The Crown maintains safeguards against compromised investigators. I am captain of the Royal Guard. And you allowed an assassin within arm's reach of the heir. The room went cold. Bellamy placed another paper beside the first. There is also this. Adrian recognized the same operational marker Elias had identified earlier. Beside it was a list of 7 coded names and a notation stating that assignments required Level 4 approval. At the bottom, in faded ink, stood the same name. Elias Fenwick. One of the ministers stared at Elias as though his frailty had become a disguise before his eyes. 7 operatives, he said. 3 confirmed killings. 2 disappearances. You expect us to believe you merely had access. Elias's expression changed very little, but Adrian saw his shoulders tighten. I expect you to notice the dates. Bellamy's eyes sharpened. Elias pointed to the assignments. The 3 killings occurred before my name appears on any authorization record. And the disappearances? After. Silence settled over the room. Adrian looked at him. Elias had not denied the connection. Worse, the record suggested that once he gained access, people began vanishing from the program. Bellamy interpreted that silence exactly as Adrian feared. Then perhaps we finally understand why an assassin kneels to you. Adrian's gaze snapped toward him. Careful. I am being careful, Your Highness. More careful than sentiment allows you to be. Bellamy turned to the guards. Until the council completes its review, Lord Elias will surrender all private correspondence and remain under supervised movement. No, Adrian said. Bellamy's composure cracked slightly. You risk the succession for a man whose name sits inside the command records of a murder apparatus. And you are trying to confiscate his life before we know what those records mean. Adrian stepped closer to the table. The order is suspended. By what authority? Mine. The answer cost him something immediately. Bellamy slowly closed the portfolio. Then I will place the matter before the king. He left without another word. The ministers followed. When the doors shut, Elias lowered himself into a chair, his face drained from the effort of standing through the confrontation. Adrian reached for the water pitcher, then stopped. Do you want it? Elias looked up. The question seemed to catch him off guard. Yes. Adrian poured without comment and set the glass within reach. Elias took it, his fingers unsteady. You just spent political capital you may need later. I know. You do not know enough about me to do that. Adrian met his eyes. Then help me know enough. Elias stared into the water for a long moment. The men who disappeared after my authorization were never found because someone wanted the court to believe they were dead. Adrian felt the pieces shifting again. Were they? Elias looked toward the copied list Bellamy had left behind. Not all of them. Then Adrian noticed something he had missed in the archive. Every disappearance occurred after Elias's name entered the system, but not one confirmed killing did. The records made him look like a commander only if no one asked what had changed once he gained access. The prisoner was supposed to be transferred before sunset, but someone tried to move him 2 hours early. Rowan caught the escort at the lower gate with papers bearing the Chancellor's seal and an order to deliver the assassin to a military prison outside the capital. The seal was genuine. The destination was not. That prison burned down 8 years ago, Rowan said when he brought the order to Adrian's study. Elias went very still beside the window. Adrian no longer mistook that stillness for weakness. Bring him here, he said. Rowan hesitated. Bellamy will call it interference. Bellamy can call it whatever he likes after I hear why someone inside my government is trying to make a witness disappear. The assassin entered 10 minutes later with his wrists bound and 4 guards around him. He looked exhausted but alert. His eyes found Elias immediately. This time he did not kneel. Elias gave the smallest shake of his head before he could. Adrian noticed the exchange. So did Rowan. The assassin remained standing. That alone felt like evidence. Rowan placed the copied level 4 record on the table. Your orders required authorization under this name. The assassin looked down at Elias Fenwick written beneath the old clearance mark. For the first time since his capture, anger broke through his control. Orders. He gave a harsh, humorless laugh. Is that what they left in the records? Rowan's hand moved toward his sword. Elias lifted 2 fingers. The captain stopped. Again, not because Elias had rank over him, but because Rowan had begun learning that the quietest person in the room often saw the danger first. Elias turned to the prisoner. The 7 names. The man's expression changed. Elias touched the list Bellamy had produced. 3 died before I had access. 2 disappeared afterward. The other 2 were marked transferred. A long silence followed. Then the assassin said, all 4 lived. Adrian felt the entire shape of the evidence shift. Rowan frowned. There were 4 disappearances? 2 recorded as missing. 2 buried under transfer orders. The assassin looked at Elias. You changed their routes. Changed their names. Put them where the chamber could not reach their families. Elias's fingers tightened against the edge of the table. He had not denied it. He had not needed to. Rowan stared between them. Level 4 access allowed you to remove operatives? No, Elias said. His voice was low. It allowed me to make the system believe it still owned them. He pulled the old record closer. The chamber did not recruit assassins. Not in the way you mean. It collected people with useful skills, then built leverage around them. Debt. Imprisoned relatives. Children who could disappear if an assignment was refused. The prisoner's face had gone flat with remembered hatred. Adrian thought of the 9-day delays Elias had identified in the archive. Containment failure. Time for handlers to threaten whatever mattered most. You used command access to falsify assignments, Adrian said slowly. Elias nodded once. At first, and later, the assassin answered for him. Later he broke the chains. Rowan looked at the man as though he had spoken another language. You knelt to him because he commanded you? No, The prisoner's reply was immediate. We kneel because he never did. No one moved. The words settled into every earlier assumption Adrian had made and destroyed them one by one. The assassin in the chapel had not recognized a hidden master. He had recognized the person who had refused to become one. Elias looked away first. You do not owe me that gesture. That was always your problem, the man said. You thought giving us a choice meant you had no right to see what we chose. Something painful crossed Elias's face. Adrian understood then why the records turned darker after Elias's name appeared, but the bodies stopped. Why disappearances replaced confirmed kills. Why access had looked like authority. Elias had entered a machine built to control people and used its own language to make them vanish from its reach. The poison, Adrian said quietly. Elias's gaze returned to him. He did not need to explain everything. The silence was enough to connect the illness no physician could fully account for. The flinch at restraint, the habit of mapping every exit. They caught you. Eventually. Elias's answer was almost too calm. Adrian felt anger rise, but this time he did not turn it into an order. May I ask what happened? Elias studied him, recognizing the difference. Not today. Adrian nodded. All right. The prisoner watched that exchange with an expression Adrian could not read. Then he looked toward the sealed transfer order Rowan had brought. If they are moving me, the old handlers are afraid. Rowan stepped closer. Handlers you can identify? Some. Then name them. The assassin's eyes hardened. Elias spoke before the conversation could become an interrogation. Not until we know whose custody is actually safe. Rowan almost objected, then looked at the false prison order and stopped. Adrian turned to the palace map. Yesterday his objective had been to discover whether Elias belonged to the threat. Now that question felt almost insulting. The real threat was the structure that had survived long enough to use the Crown's own seals, guards, archives, and transfer orders. We stop investigating Elias, Adrian said. We investigate who reopened the chamber. Rowan nodded slowly. Elias did not. He was staring at the forged transfer route, his face pale for an entirely different reason. Adrian, he said, using his name without title for the first time in front of another person. If they still have access to relocation orders, then they may still have access to the identities I created. The assassin closed his eyes. Adrian understood the consequence before anyone said it aloud. The people Elias had once made disappear were alive, and someone inside the royal government might now know exactly where to find them. By nightfall, 2 of the 4 people Elias had once hidden were already missing from their new homes. Rowan brought the report into Adrian's study without ceremony, rain still darkening the shoulders of his uniform. One house was empty. No struggle. The second family left dinner on the table and every lamp burning. Elias closed his eyes. Adrian saw his hand tighten around the arm of the chair, but this time he did not reach for him. Were the names taken from the old relocation archive? Elias asked. We don't know. The archive was sealed this afternoon by order of the Security Council. Rowan placed another document on the desk. Bellamy claims it is to prevent further leaks. Adrian stared at the seal. The Chancellor had adapted quickly. When eliminating a witness had failed, he had moved to controlling the evidence. Then we cannot rely on royal custody, Adrian said. Not for witnesses. Not for files. Not until we know who can open which door. Elias looked at him. That includes you. The words could have sounded accusatory. Instead, they sounded tired. Adrian nodded. Yes. Rowan shifted uncomfortably. Crown princes were not supposed to admit that their own authority might be compromised. Elias noticed the hesitation and, despite everything, a faint trace of dry humor touched his voice. Careful. Another sentence like that, and people may begin to think you're reasonable. Adrian looked at him. I was hoping marriage would improve me. Ambitious. The small exchange disappeared as quickly as it came, but it changed the room. For the first time since the assassin had entered the chapel, Elias was not merely defending himself from Adrian's protection. They were standing on the same side of the problem. Rowan unfolded a map. If the surviving operatives are being hunted, we need their names. Elias's expression closed. No, we cannot protect people we cannot locate. And I cannot hand a compromised government a list of everyone the chamber failed to keep. Rowan's frustration sharpened. Then give it to the prince. Elias looked at Adrian instead of answering. Adrian understood the test immediately. A week ago, he would have said yes. He would have promised secrecy, demanded the list, and called the demand protection. No, he said. Rowan stared at him. Your Highness, if Elias gives me those names because I have enough power to pressure him, then we have learned nothing from the people we are hunting. Elias's face changed slightly. Not relief exactly. Something more careful than that. Trust, perhaps, deciding whether it was safe to exist. Adrian turned the map around. We need a method that does not require names. Elias leaned forward. Signals. Rowan frowned. What kind? The chamber used coded notices to summon operatives without exposing their locations. I changed some of those protocols before I disappeared. Can the survivors recognize them? Adrian asked. If they still remember. Would the current handlers recognize them too? Elias considered that. Not if we use the alterations I never entered into official records. There was the new path. Not a list. Not forced disclosure. A message only the people Elias had freed would understand. Rowan began marking towns where old chamber activity had once been recorded. Adrian watched Elias work beside him, correcting routes, rejecting unsafe couriers, identifying which communication channels had probably been compromised. His physical strength faded steadily, but his mind did not. After nearly an hour, Adrian noticed Elias rubbing 2 fingers against his wrist, the first sign that pain was catching up with him. Do you need a break? He asked. Elias glanced over. The old answer would have been automatic refusal. Instead, he exhaled. 5 minutes. Adrian moved the documents aside and poured water. He placed the glass within reach rather than pressing it into Elias's hand. Elias accepted it. You're becoming inconveniently teachable, he murmured. I'll try to recover. The warmth lasted only until Rowan returned from the outer office carrying a fresh packet. This was delivered to every member of the Security Council. The paper inside bore copies of 3 recent assassination orders, all dated within the last 6 months. Each carried the same Level 4 authorization marker they had seen in the archive. Beneath the marker was a name. Elias Fenwick. Adrian read the first document twice. The signature structure was correct. The code sequence was correct. Even Elias went silent. These aren't crude forgeries, Rowan said. Whoever made them understands the system as well as he does. Elias took one sheet carefully. His eyes moved across the notation, the spacing, the sequence of marks. No, he said. They understand it better than anyone should. Adrian felt the brief warmth of the previous hour vanish. Can you prove you didn't authorize these? Elias looked at the dates. 2 fell during the months before their marriage, when he had been living quietly on the Fenwick estate under physician's supervision. The 3rd was from 11 days ago. Not quickly. Rowan's expression hardened. Bellamy has already called an emergency session for dawn. Adrian looked at Elias, then at the evidence designed to make every act of mercy in his past look like command authority in the present. Their new objective had been clear for less than an hour. Warn the survivors, protect their identities, and expose whoever had revived the chamber without becoming another version of it. Now someone had made that strategy almost impossible. By dawn, Adrian would have to defend a husband who appeared, on paper, to still be commanding assassins. At dawn, Lord Chancellor Bellamy did not ask the Security Council to investigate Elias. He asked them to confine him. The emergency chamber was already full when Adrian entered, with ministers standing behind a long table covered in copied assassination orders and sealed intelligence reports. Elias walked beside him without assistance, though Adrian could see the effort in the careful set of his shoulders. At the far end of the room, Bellamy rose. 3 assassinations in 6 months. 3 Level 4 authorizations. 1 name. He pushed the documents forward. Elias Fenwick. Adrian did not sit. Evidence we received hours after someone attempted to remove our only living witness to a prison that no longer exists. Which proves the palace is compromised, Bellamy said. Not that your husband is innocent. 2 guards moved toward Elias. Adrian stepped between them. Bellamy's expression barely changed. The king signed the emergency order before sunrise. Until these documents are authenticated, Lord Elias is to remain under royal protection, his correspondence seized, his movements restricted, and all contact with former intelligence personnel prohibited. Elias gave a quiet breath beside Adrian. Royal protection. Adrian heard the meaning in his voice. A cage with a respectable name. The papers can be authenticated without imprisoning him. Bellamy opened another folder. They already have been. Captain Rowan took the report and read quickly. His face hardened. The ink was consistent with surviving chamber stock. The authorization structure matched old records. Even the coded spacing Elias had explained in the archive was correct. Someone had not merely forged his name. They had rebuilt the language around it. There is more, Bellamy continued. One of the missing relocated operatives was found before dawn. Elias turned sharply. Alive. Bellamy's pause answered first. No, the room seemed to lose its air. A body had been recovered outside the northern gate with an old chamber mark burned into the leather of his coat, and a copy of Elias's supposed authorization order tucked beneath it. Elias lowered his eyes for only a second, but Adrian saw the grief strike. This was no longer an accusation that could be contained in archives. Someone Elias had once saved was dead, and the murder had been shaped to look like Elias's command. They want the others frightened, Elias said. Bellamy looked at him. Or perhaps they want the court to understand what you are. Adrian's anger rose hot and immediate. Enough. No, Elias said softly. Adrian turned. Elias was looking at Bellamy, not him. Let him speak. Men like this prefer a room where they believe every silence belongs to them. Bellamy's eyes cooled. For the first time, Adrian saw something beneath the Chancellor's polished control. Recognition, not of Elias's identity, but of his methods. Elias saw it too. You know the old procedures, Elias said. Better than a chancellor should. A minister shifted uneasily. Bellamy did not. I know what the crown requires me to know. Then you know level 4 orders were never stored alone. Every valid authorization had a custody echo in a separate ledger. Rowan looked up. The archive we searched had no second ledger. Exactly. Elias's gaze stayed on Bellamy. Because these documents were built to survive inspection, not to survive comparison. The pressure in the chamber changed. They were close to something now, close enough that Bellamy stopped pretending this was merely a review. Search whatever ledger you like, he said. Until then, the emergency order stands. Adrian could challenge it publicly, but doing so would mean defying the king-signed authority while evidence tied Elias to murder. If he allowed the order, Elias would be isolated inside the same royal machinery someone was already manipulating. Adrian looked at the dead operative's report, then at the guards waiting beside his husband. Fear made the answer feel obvious. Keep Elias where Adrian could control every door, every visitor, every risk. He stays in my private wing, Adrian said. Elias looked at him. Adrian continued before doubt could catch him. No external contact. No unsupervised correspondence. Rowan assigns the guard personally. Adrian. Elias said his name quietly, but the hurt in it stopped him more effectively than anger. This is temporary. So were the rooms they used to hold us before assignments. Adrian felt the blow land. That is not what this is. You are deciding where I may go, whom I may speak to, and which truths I am permitted to carry because you are afraid of what might happen if I choose for myself. Adrian lowered his voice. A man is dead. I know. Elias's composure finally cracked. I helped him disappear 11 years ago. The chamber went silent. And now you are putting me somewhere the people who killed him can reach through official channels. Adrian wanted to deny it. Then Rowan crossed the room and placed a newly arrived security notice in his hand. The guard detail for Adrian's private wing had already been reassigned. The order had been issued 20 minutes before Adrian chose to confine Elias there. Bellamy said nothing. He did not need to. Adrian looked at the authorization seal and understood exactly what he had done. Someone had predicted his fear, predicted his need to protect, and prepared the cage before he ever ordered Elias inside it. Rowan's hand went to his sword. Your Highness, we need to move him now. The chamber doors slammed shut from the outside, followed by the heavy turn of a locking bar. Elias stared at Adrian, grief replaced by terrible clarity. They never needed you to trust the evidence, he said. They only needed you to act like a crown prince who was too afraid to let me choose. Adrian tore the confinement order in half before Bellamy could speak. The sound was small against the locked chamber doors, but every guard in the room heard it. Lord Elias is no longer under restriction, Adrian said. Bellamy's expression sharpened. You do not have the authority to overturn the king's emergency order. I am not overturning his order. Adrian dropped the torn pages onto the council table. I am withdrawing mine. Rowan understood first. The private wing confinement, the isolation, the decision Bellamy had predicted, those had been Adrian's. He had created the cage himself. Adrian turned to Elias. I was afraid, so I chose for you. I will not do it again. Elias stared at him, still pale from the report of the murdered operative. Beyond the doors, boots shifted in the corridor. Bellamy had men waiting. This is not the moment for sentiment, the Chancellor said. No, Adrian replied. It is the moment when sentiment stops being an excuse for control. He removed the royal signet from his hand and placed it on the table between them. No order in my name is to be used against Elias without his consent. Rowan, record that. Bellamy's composure finally cracked. You would risk the crown for a man tied to assassins? Adrian looked at Elias instead of answering him. What do you need? The question changed the room more than any command had. Elias's eyes dropped briefly to the signet, then to the sealed documents spread across the table. The original 3 authorization orders. Bellamy moved first. His hand came down over the folder. Those are Crown evidence. Elias looked at him. Then you should have no reason to hide them. Rowan stepped between Bellamy and the table. This time Adrian did not order Elias back. Elias approached the records himself and laid the 3 supposed level 4 orders side by side. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. You copied the spacing correctly. The code sequence. The ink stock. Even the dead drop notation. Bellamy said nothing. But you made one mistake. Elias pointed to the lower margins. There is no custody echo. One minister frowned. You told us that ledger was missing. The ledger is not the point, Elias said. The absence is. He slid the oldest authentic order from the archive beside the new ones. Beneath its authorization line sat a tiny secondary mark, nearly invisible unless someone knew where to look. Every legitimate level 4 order generated a second control mark at the moment of release. Not later. Not in a separate office. At release. Rowan bent closer. The modern orders had none. Bellamy's jaw tightened. A damaged copy proves nothing. Elias nodded toward the transfer order that had tried to send the captured assassin to a prison destroyed 8 years ago. That order has the same flaw. Adrian saw Bellamy understand before anyone else did. The false transfer, the fabricated assassination orders, the evidence around the murdered operative. They had all been constructed by someone who understood the chamber's procedures almost perfectly, but only from surviving administrative records. Someone who knew how the system looked from above, not how it actually moved in the hands of operatives. You knew enough to rebuild it, Elias said quietly. Not enough to have lived inside it. Bellamy's hand moved toward his coat. Rowan drew his sword. The Chancellor stopped. Outside, the locking bar shifted, but Adrian raised his voice before the doors opened. Any guard entering this chamber on Bellamy's authority will be treated as acting against the Crown. Silence followed. Adrian could hear his own pulse. Bellamy looked at the ministers, recalculating. You have a theory, he said. Nothing more. Then let the witness speak, Adrian replied. Bellamy's eyes flicked toward him. That was enough. Rowan crossed to the side door and struck the inner alarm lever used during council emergencies. Moments later, the captured assassin was brought from the adjoining guard station under escort. He saw Bellamy and stopped. No kneeling this time. Only hatred. Him, the assassin said. Not as Chancellor. Before that, he handled the families. Bellamy lunged for the table, not the door, for the list of relocated names. Elias reached it first and pulled the papers away. Adrian could have ordered the guards to seize Bellamy immediately. Instead, he let the silence expose the choice Bellamy had just made in front of the entire council. Rowan moved in and bound the Chancellor's wrists. You cannot prove the rest, Bellamy said through clenched teeth. Not without the names. Not without forcing him to open every record he hid. Adrian looked at Elias. Bellamy was right about one thing. Adrian could compel disclosure now, secure the survivors, strengthen the case, and make victory nearly certain. The old instinct rose again. Control the risk, protect everyone, decide quickly. He let it pass. The Crown will take what Elias chooses to give, Adrian said. Nothing more. Bellamy stared at him as if that answer were incomprehensible. Elias did too, but for a different reason. After a long moment, Elias turned to Rowan. I can authenticate the routes without naming the people who survived them. I can show you which orders were real, which were altered, and where Bellamy's office intersects with the transfer chain. He looked at Adrian. And I will do it voluntarily. That decision broke what remained of Bellamy's defense. By midday, the council had enough corroborated evidence to suspend him, seize his office, and secure the surviving chamber records. The forged assassination orders collapsed under comparison. The old program's remaining structure was exposed not by forcing Elias to surrender the people he had saved, but by proving how the system had been manipulated around them. When the chamber finally emptied, Adrian and Elias were left standing on opposite sides of the same table. The danger had changed. Bellamy had lost control. The chamber could no longer hide behind the Crown. But Adrian knew the harder question was still untouched. He had given Elias back his freedom only after taking it away. Now Elias was free enough to leave him. By the next morning, Bellamy's office had been sealed, 6 compromised officers were under arrest, and the surviving chamber records had been removed from the Chancellor's control. Rowan found the second missing family alive before sunrise, hidden in an abandoned mill after they recognized one of Elias's old warning signals. The captured assassin gave his testimony under his own name and refused every offer of immunity that required him to implicate people who had been coerced into service. For the first time in 11 years, the Crown's official record described the chamber for what it had been, not a secret order of loyal killers, but a system that had turned frightened people into weapons by threatening everyone they loved. Adrian read the first corrected report in silence. Elias was not beside him. He had returned to the Fenwick rooms after the council dispersed, and Adrian had not followed. That was the first choice Adrian made after the crisis that felt harder than giving an order. He wanted to explain. He wanted to apologize until the right combination of words made the damage smaller. Instead, he gave Elias what he should have given him before, an unlocked door and the freedom to decide whether Adrian crossed it. Near noon, a servant brought back the untouched breakfast tray from Elias's rooms. Adrian noticed the untouched tea first, then hated himself for noticing it like evidence. "You could simply go see him," Rowan said. Adrian looked up from the security reports. "That sounds dangerously like advice." "It is. I dislike the experience." Adrian almost smiled. "His door is open. Then why are you here?" Adrian glanced toward the eastern corridor. "Because open is not the same as invited." Rowan considered that, then nodded once. "You are improving." Adrian groaned softly. "Apparently, everyone has decided to tell me that." Elias appeared in the doorway before Rowan could answer. He looked exhausted, but steadier than he had the night before. Dressed plainly without the ceremonial layers the court seemed determined to put on him whenever it wanted him to look harmless. His eyes moved automatically across the room, the windows, the side passage, Rowan's position near the desk. Then they stopped on Adrian. Adrian rose, but did not approach. "The survivor at the mill?" Elias said. "Alive. His family too." Some tension left Elias's shoulders. Adrian pushed the report across the desk. "Their identities are sealed under Rowan's authority. No copies." Elias read the first page. His hand paused over the line acknowledging coercion. "You changed the wording. The old version called them assets." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I thought that was obscene." Elias looked at him for a long moment. It was. Silence settled, gentler than the ones they had shared before. Adrian finally said, "I am sorry." Elias did not rescue him from the discomfort. "For which part?" "For deciding that loving you gave me the right to remove your choices." Adrian kept his hands flat against the desk, nowhere near Elias. "I told myself I was protecting you because I was afraid of losing you. The truth is, I was protecting myself from having to trust a decision I couldn't control." Elias lowered his eyes to the report. "You did lose my trust." "I know. I don't know if one good decision fixes that." "It shouldn't." Adrian let the answer stand. "I'm not asking you to stay because I tore up one order." That finally brought Elias's gaze back to him. Adrian continued, quieter now. "If you want to leave the palace, Rowan will arrange protection that answers to you. If you want the marriage annulled, I will not oppose it. If you stay, I will not confuse your body needing care with your life needing permission." Elias's expression changed at that. Not dramatically, but enough for Adrian to see the old fear beneath it. The fear that once people understood what Elias could do, they would either use him or lock him away. "You still pity me?" Elias asked. Adrian thought of the first days of their marriage, of chairs moved without asking, ceremonies shortened by command, a frail groom he had imagined himself nobly protecting. "Sometimes I hurt for what pain costs you," he said. "That isn't the same thing." He took a breath. "I don't think you're helpless anymore." "I think I was." Elias's mouth twitched. That was almost dramatic. "I am a crown prince. We're trained for it." The small laugh Elias gave him was tired but real. It was the first easy sound between them since before the council chamber. Later that afternoon, the assassin who had knelt in the chapel came to give his final statement before leaving royal custody. When he saw Elias, instinct pulled him toward one knee again. Elias held out a hand. "Don't." The man stopped. "My lord, stand." This time the assassin smiled. He stood, took Elias's offered hand, and gripped it once before walking away free. Adrian watched the exchange and understood what the kneeling had meant from the beginning. Elias had never wanted obedience. He had wanted people to have enough freedom that respect became a choice. When evening came, Adrian found Elias on the western terrace, one hand resting against the stone rail as he watched the city below. Adrian stopped several feet away. "You've been standing too long." Elias glanced over. "There he is." Adrian sighed. "Would you like to sit?" "Better." Adrian brought the chair instead of bringing Elias to it. Elias sat because he chose to, then looked toward the terrace doors. "You know, there are 3 exits from here." Adrian pointed without thinking. Main doors. Service stair. Garden passage behind the ivy. Elias stared at him. You've started doing it too. Occupational hazard. Marriage, apparently. Adrian sat beside him. Their shoulders did not touch until Elias shifted closer on his own. Below them, palace guards crossed the courtyard under new orders that required independent review of every sealed security command. Nothing was magically repaired. One man was still dead. Others would carry the chamber with them for the rest of their lives. Elias's health had not changed simply because the truth had, but the door behind them remained unlocked, and Adrian did not look back to check it. Elias did. Then, after a moment, he smiled and stayed.